Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Charles Green and I'm part of the marketing team here at Bellatrix Software, and I'm going to be your host today. Firstly, thank you all very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join this call, where we're going to be talking about the changing face of agriculture. And we've decided to focus on this topic because we've spoken a lot about the impact of digital technology here at Bellatrix together with our clients within different industries, from finance to healthcare, but also in terms of agriculture as well. So we've been looking at, for example, at the challenges that organizations face in adapting to a new digital world. How can they best adopt some of these new technologies to create business value? And one of the areas which clearly has tremendous potential to gain from digital is agriculture. Yet despite the fact that there are very clear benefits to farmers and growers, there are a number of challenges that the industry still needs to overcome. So to discuss this and the state of digital agriculture, I'm delighted to be joined today by Reinder Prins, who is a digital agronomist. Reinder, how are you?
Doing well, Charles. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. It's great that you're here today. Can you give a bit of background to your experience?
Yeah, so I'm normally based in Australia. I work for a seed, chemical and fertilizer company that distributes that to the growers. I used to work there in a capacity of digital agriculture specialist. In that role, I was mainly occupied with advising growers what was going to come next in the sphere of digital agriculture and how they could play into that. That mainly means looking together with growers as to what they can do to optimize their production and how digital agriculture can aid them with it. I'm currently based in South America and doing freelance work in the space of digital agriculture with Bellatrix, amongst other companies. With that, I obviously find it very interesting to see what we're going to see next in this sphere and how we can help growers, but also other partners in this chain, maximize the benefit they realize from this new stream of technology coming online.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Now, before we go any further, I should mention that today's session is going to be very open. So while we're going to be talking and discussing, presenting for much of the next half hour, please feel free to ask questions. And you can do that one of two ways, either by the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, or via Twitter, where we're going to be live tweeting throughout using the hashtag #AgricultureBSF. And firstly, for those of you not familiar with Bellatrix, we are a leading provider of software development services with expertise in product and mobile application development. Our focus is on innovation and really shaping the concepts and ideas of our clients into world-class software products. We have delivery centers in Mendoza and Buenos Aires in Argentina, in Lima, in Peru, where Reinder and myself are based today, and Bogota, Colombia as well. So to start off today's discussion without any further ado, Reiner, how do you define precision agriculture or digital agriculture?
Well, I guess, Charles, to start with that, we first have to look at the traditional decision-making process. Normally, back in the day, say, from as early as when growers starting to grow crops, they look at a field. So a field is normally defined by the fence, so by the boundary. So for example, if you have a 100-hectare field with a fence around it, traditionally growers used to apply the same amount of fertilizer, seed, and chemicals to this whole field. Now, what digital agriculture is aiming to do is divide this whole field up into zones. So by dividing this field up in zones, you can then give different treatment to different parts of a field. For example, if you look at soil type, crop health, nutrients, or any other metric available, you can then use that to decide to use more or less fertilizer in a specific part of the field, or use any other input, but apply it with a variable rate. So instead of using the whole field, you use a specific zone to decide what you're going to utilize. The same goes if you look at animal husbandry. For example, looking at the dairy industry, if you measure individually per cow the amount of milk that is produced, you can then from that actually tailor the feed ration of the cow to their production. In other words, if you have a blanket rate of feed set per cow, some cows are going to get too much, others aren't going to get enough. So what precision agriculture is aiming to do is tailor the amount of inputs, be it feed for cows or be it, say, fertilizer for crops, to exactly what is needed in that specific situation.
Okay, excellent. I think based on that, you've come up with this definition of precision agriculture.
Yeah, that is correct. So we actually center it around the belief of measuring what you have to do. So you first have to measure what is actually going on. From that, you analyze it, and from that, you then actually tailor the execution of your inputs to exactly what you're measuring. So, and this applies really to everything in agriculture, Charles. It's not only just mainly, say, broadacre cropping, where a lot of people think of, or specific dairy herds, but anything you do in agriculture can be tailored to a smaller subunit than what is currently happening, and by that you can optimize your process.
But in order then to optimize your processes, what is key then is information, is data to inform that decision, right?
Correct, yes. So anything that you want to change, you have to measure first. So I guess traditionally, if you didn't know the amount of nutrients available in the soil and you didn't know the exact amount of crop harvested in a specific area, all you could really do was apply a blanket rate of your inputs. What digital agriculture is aiming to do is really to gain different layers of data. So you want to collect the data where you can. For example, on a harvester, you can collect your yield data. You get certain amount of data from satellites, as in NDVI, which is your infrared picture of your crop, which indicates the crop health amongst other metrics. You can look at the elevation of a field, so you might have waterlogging or other problems, which is indicated by your elevation, and you also gather the information of what you've applied. So if you say variable rate applied to fertilizer, you gather that information. You get all these different layers of information together, and you interpret that. Now, by having all this data available does not mean that a traditional farm advisor or an agronomist is bypassed. Merely what it's aiming to do is get this farm advisor or agronomist additional tools to manage a crop. So the agronomist is then offered all these layers of data together with the grower. He then has to interpret it. For this interpretation, certain amounts of software can be used, or he can get a third party involved. And once this data is analyzed, from that you can then derive a management plan for this specific crop or this specific field, and that can then be executed. Now, when you go to the execution phase, you will obviously need, in certain situations, you need equipment to make sure you can variable rate your inputs. So that can be like, say, a spreader, or for your fertilizer, or for cows it can be a variable rate feed box, or it can be anything that you might need, or a planter, for example. But you will need certain bits of equipment to, in cropping, for example, to actually act on a shapefile with a variable rate script on it.
Now, is this something which is just for those very large, technically advanced type of farms?
Well, I guess it's an interesting question, Charles, and often it is assumed that it is mainly for those farms or those growers that already possess a large amount of technically advanced equipment, that with that equipment can actually collect data and then utilize that to use for variable rate applications and other potential users. However, what we're seeing now, especially with the beginning of IoT devices getting adopted on farms, is that there is a very, very big sphere for traditionally, I guess, smaller growers, or growers in areas where, say, good agronomic advice is not available, to utilize IoT devices. With that, gain that bit of information they normally don't have, as in, say, soil nutrients, crop nutrients, whatever you might have. Because it is obviously all cloud-based, it can then be shared with expert advisors in a different area, so they can be based on the other side of the world. And as long as a grower has, for example, a smartphone or a tablet, with it he can then access that advice and act upon it. So yes, digitally advanced growers, they can make very good use of the new technology on offer, but growers that do not use any digital means at the moment also stand to gain significantly from the new advances that we're seeing.
Now, you mentioned there about the Internet of Things and some of these newer technologies which are rapidly emerging. And I think now it's a good time to position and to turn to some of the key technologies that we've identified as really driving the adoption of precision agriculture. And just to let people on the line know that we're going to be publishing a white paper on precision agriculture, which we'll be publishing after this call. But firstly, I want to talk with you, Ryan, today about some of these key technologies that you have helped us identify as really driving precision agriculture.
Yeah, so we'll start off with the Internet of Things, Charles. So IoT devices, they have an enormous power to actually collect more data for growers, then connect this and exchange it, and with that actually gain a big data set that a grower can then utilize to change his crop management. Now, in order to actively manage a crop, you have to get information, but you also have to be able to act on it. Now, as I mentioned, in Australia, I work in the cotton industry. So I guess a good example to go on there is, for example, water management. Now, in the Australian cotton industry, it's a very dry and arid area. Water, the availability thereof, or rather the lack thereof, often is the main thing that decides how many hectares a grower can crop in a certain year. In other words, if you can save water, that's a very big and important thing. Traditionally, if growers look at their water scheduling, so at their irrigation scheduling, they use a moisture probe. So they put one moisture probe, which manages soil water content in a field. They look at the amount of millimeters that it can draw on down every day. And based on that, they then schedule their irrigation. Now, with the IoT devices becoming available to growers, an example of what this could change in the cotton industry, or in any other industry for that matter, is canopy temperature sensors. So with a canopy temperature sensor, it actually measures the temperature of a cotton plant. By measuring the cotton plant and measuring the temperature thereof, you can see when a plant is getting stressed, water stressed, or maybe already when it's about to, so you can actually avoid a plant getting stressed. Now, a cotton plant uses about 80% of its water for cooling down, not for growing cotton. So if a cotton plant doesn't properly cool down, it gets stressed and it produces less cotton, or the quality thereof, it gets less. Now, by only measuring one point, as we do with a soil moisture probe, we only really have a snapshot of a field, and it might or might not be representative of the field, depending on where you put it. Now, by being able to have more smaller sensors that are cheaper, whereas a moisture probe is quite expensive, if you have a lot of smaller sensors that put data up to a cloud, you can then see how different plants in different parts of the field behave. Now, if you have different soil types, or say soil depth or moisture holding capacity due to carbon content, whatever you might have, you can then see differences in the field. Now, depending on your type of irrigation, you might not be able to do variable rate irrigate, but maybe for next year, you can then work on different seeding rates or different fertilizer rates, whatever you might have, but you can tailor those inputs. And with that, you can then ensure that you don't get moisture stress in as many parts of the field, or you don't waste water. In other words, in an area where water is critical, you can then make the best use of it. Now, as I just mentioned, that can enhance your yield, but also your quality. For cotton, for example, yield is important, but quality is just as important, because if your quality is low, you get very high penalties for that, and you can potentially undo all the extra yield you've created, because the amount of dollars you get per bale goes down. Now, another IoT application we could see there is that currently harvesters can already measure how much cotton is getting harvested. Now, 10 years ago, they could not do that, but at the moment, they still don't look at quality. Normally, quality is decided in a cotton classing lab. However, there are already small devices that are getting developed by certain companies that use near-infrared to look at a cotton fiber, where you mainly look at color, length, strength, and thickness. Now, if you would have a device available today where you can accurately and quickly measure a cotton fiber in different parts of the field, which would then tie a geographical location to this measurement, it would store that in the cloud, and with that, you can actually create a quality map of the field. This would be very valuable information to a grower to, say, manage which bales he sends to a gin first and last, to which contract he wants to fill, or going into next year, which nutrients he has to apply at certain part of the season in order to enhance the quality. So there's a whole lot of applications already, and that's just on a cotton farm for IoT devices. Now, I can see this in every other industry. If you have sensors that measure soil nutrients, crop nutrients, whatever else you have, get that up to a cloud, get a geographically reference. You can from that then change your crop management and enhance your bottom line.
Excellent. And what you're saying there, the lower cost of sensors in particular is driving this, and that one of the results of that is that you're improving your yield, you're improving the quality, so which sounds great. So why is this not being adopted so as quickly as perhaps it could be?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for it, Charles. For example, in the example that I just used, canopy temperature sensors, there has to be an algorithm as well. So just knowing the temperature of a cotton plant doesn't do much, because you still have to then actually know when is a plant getting stressed. So what's the ambient temperature, what's the temperature of a cotton plant, and what's the algorithm for stress there. So that's something that has to be developed, which is obviously proprietary knowledge. Now, the other challenge that we're seeing is mainly connectivity. Farms are in general in a rural areas in a lot of countries struggle with internet connectivity. Now, if you have an IoT device, but you cannot get that data up to a cloud, you're still going to have a problem. So similar to a data storage platform, the data still has to go somewhere. So all these things, so cheaper, better, and more available IoT devices, your connectivity, and your data storage platforms, they all go hand in hand. So if there's no cell phone network, well, there has to be a different way to get your data up to the cloud. And we're now seeing companies that are offering these sort of services, and this all goes hand in hand, and that speeds up the development of Internet of Things devices and all sorts of other technological advancements that have to go with it.
How far along do you think we are in terms of adoption? What's your kind of, in terms of the timeline of when we can see this getting becoming more widespread?
Well, what I'm seeing at the moment, Charles, is that it is already getting adopted, but mainly in higher value crops. So where higher value crops normally means that a smaller area is used, so you're not going to have the same amount of connectivity problems, or they're going to be easier to solve. Plus, normally there's a bit more margin available to get this sort of data. What we normally see in the adoption cycle in agriculture is that as the products get more advanced and the price goes down, a larger group of growers is going to get access to that. Now, with the potential gains to be had from this technology, I suspect within the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to see a lot more of this. And from then, even in 5 and 10 years' time, there's going to be rapid and very good advances that we're going to see constantly to help growers get the most out of this technology that's available.
Okay, excellent. So moving on then from what is already quite an established technology in terms of the Internet of Things, and moving to and technology which is very much at, I think, arguably very much at the early stages of adoption of its in terms of development, is blockchain, and we've seen blockchain playing a role, starting becoming being used in some industries. What is happening in agriculture with blockchain?
Well, I think blockchain, as is in every other sector, is very much in the news. You cannot open a newspaper reading about some sort of blockchain-enabled technology. Well, what we're seeing in agriculture, for example, is grain and other bulk commodities are getting tracked by blockchain. So there's startups and even more established companies out there that are using blockchain to track grain. Now, this can have a couple of different benefits to farmers or to other people in the chain. It makes trading easier. It increases visibility. So, for example, there have already been international shipments of soybeans from the States to China, where blockchain was used to store all the information of this particular trade. And as you know, when you trade grain from one country to another, there's an enormous amount of paperwork involved. Blockchain can be used to track all this paperwork and other documents involved, increase the confidence from both sides, and also speed up the process. Something else that can be done here is the pesticide and herbicide limit on bulk commodities is very strictly monitored by most importing countries. Normally, if something like a shipment, for example, of grain has a certain herbicide on it in too high a concentration, well, the importing country can then block the imports from this specific country for the whole commodity. Now, what blockchain can do, it can then trace a specific shipment to a farm or a certain area, and measurements can then be taken by the importing country only against a certain area. So that means that 90% of the exporting country is unaffected by these measurements, whereas now it can potentially cripple a whole sector, and a lot of growers can have a big negative effect from import bans. This can then actually show exactly where it came from, incentivizing growers to stick to what they have to do, which 99% of the growers want to do anyway, but it can also help an industry by not getting completely blocked from a very important market. Now, what blockchain, in my opinion, can do, and where it has a massive fit, is that it can actually increase the value that growers can command for their products. Now, some of the examples that we're seeing just last week, Alibaba announced that they will actually use blockchain to track the food that is getting sold on that platform. The first trial that they have is with New Zealand Post and Fonterra, which is a big dairy company, and Australia Post and Blackmores. Now, both Blackmores and Fonterra sell their products, baby formula, and mainly vitamins and supplements, on Alibaba. Now, the reason why Chinese consumers are willing to buy from these companies which sell the products at a premium is that they believe that there's more trust in the product, and they believe there's less chance of getting fraud with food, and especially baby formula has obviously been in the news and it's been a big problem. Now, blockchain enables consumers to know exactly where a certain product came from and to know for sure that what they're buying has the quality it says it has and is from the country it says it's from. Now, I think what this allows growers to do, and also other producers, is to get more confidence in their product and increase the price they can get for their end product. And in the example of Fonterra, for example, if they can get more money for their products, well, they can raise the milk price to growers, and it will have a positive effect to everyone involved in the chain.
It's really about using technology then to drive business value and really create opening new markets, as you mentioned in the China example.
Correct. Yes, that's correct. Where when we look at IoT devices, they're mainly geared towards production, so increasing production. However, if you cannot increase production for whatever reason, but you increase the price you can get for your commodity, you're going to get gains as well. Or ideally, you can do both. But blockchain is about using this technology to your advantage. And I think that's really what we're seeing already, and we'll see a lot more of in the future.
And we've certainly seen certain kind of food scares regarding some, foodstuffs in supermarkets. And if you have that greater traceability via blockchain technology, you can increase the food safety for consumers.
That is correct, and that's why we're already seeing, for example, even fresh milk shipments from Australia going to China. And I think it'll be the same here in South America, where you're exporting to North America. If you can use blockchain to your advantage, where consumers or whoever wants to in the destination country can track exactly what they're buying, where it came from, and where it went through, I think that'll help everyone, but especially growers and also the producers. Some like Fonterra, like the dairy factory, it can help them increase their market share, but also increase the value for their product. So if you cannot produce more of something, or if you can sell it for a higher price, you're still winning. And I think blockchain is the technology that can help growers do this.
Yeah, excellent. So moving on then from very much an emerging technology with blockchain to perhaps one which is very much already at the backbone of digital agriculture. I want to now talk about digital storage platforms and why you think that's more complicated in agriculture than in other sectors.
Well, if you look at data, Charles, if you look at most data that gets collected, it can be personal data or can be, say vehicle tracking data, or you can anonymize it. If a car went from A to B at a certain time, you can anonymize data to the point they can never find out who it actually was that was driving from A to B. Now, inherently, when you look at ag data, because it is important where the data came from, a GPS location or a lat long location is always attached to the data. And because you have a lat long position attached to the data, you cannot anonymize it. Without this lat long data, it is pretty much useless, because if you don't know where the data came from, you miss a whole sort of frame of reference for the specific bit of data, which makes it really hard to actually anonymize data. Now, the problem with ag data is if you look at, for example, yield data of one farm, you only get a snapshot because you knew what happened on this farm. If you can now look at 20 neighbors and see what they harvested in this exact same season, you get a lot bigger picture, and you can see where this specific farm fit in. So is it producing a lot in comparison to its neighbors? Is it comparing maybe a very small amount? Or what's going on? What does its gross margins look like? So you need comparison. But if you're going to share your data, who are you sharing it with? Where is it going to go to? And we've recently seen a fair few scares. For example, Facebook has had trouble with sharing the user content. Well, who is it getting shared to? which third-party apps are getting access to it. Well, this is very important in agriculture as well. For example, in the European Union, they've recently enacted a general data protection regulation. Now, this is meant to protect data, but does it actually, is it applied to ag data as well? Because the actual data is only, the data protection scheme is only for personal data. But the law says that if a company has an established presence in Europe or processes data related to offerings, goods, or services in the European Union, yeah, it's part of this data scheme. But it has to be personal data. And normally you would say agricultural data, it's not personal data. But take yield data for an example. If you track what you're harvesting and which part of the field, that's agricultural data. But now if you add the name of the driver or the operator of the machinery to this data, well, you can argue it's actually becoming personal data because you track where a person has been at a certain point in time. So now, does it fall under this protection scheme or does it not? And I think there's a lot of issues that have to be addressed there. And with data, agricultural data can be classified in different ways depending on the country and the laws that apply to it, which is very much a gray area in a lot of different cases. And with trust being a major issue for growers, before they can actually reap the benefits from having this data, or big data as you will, they need to be able to share data and give other people access to it. But being able to trust that this data falls not in hands that can actually abuse it to where it would negatively affect what a grower can do in his operations. So there's a lot of ifs and buts here. And I guess coming back to the Internet of Things discussion we had just now, the connectivity is a problem here, because whatever data you connect, you need to get it up to the cloud. And if you still rely on your cell phone network in a rural area where you might have 3G, but it is very slow, as soon as you get significant amount of data, you are going to run into problems. Now, you do see low power wide area networks are getting started up in different areas and in different countries. You also have different companies that are finding new satellite-based technology to beam IoT data up to the internet and from there to data storages. But as mentioned before, you're going to need a device to collect the data. You're going to need to get it up to the cloud somehow. And then you're going to need a data platform which satisfies all the demands put on it by growers, agronomists, retailers, software providers, or anyone else in the chain. If you do not have that, you are going to have a problem. So that's what we're looking at and say, well, okay, whatever application you develop, you have to look at all these metrics and make sure that you set yourself up for a successful product straight away from the start.
Okay, excellent. So we've looked then at the three key technologies that we've identified: blockchain, data storage platforms, Internet of Things. What advice do you have for farmers or growers who are interested in some of this technology? How should they go about getting started if they haven't already?
Well, it really depends on what you're trying to gain from it. But in general, I would always advise growers to not act alone. So say if you're trying to track your inputs and you're trying to track how you can use variable rate or other technology to your advantage, you're going to need your agronomist on board. You're going to need your ag retailer on board. Now, if you want to benchmark what you're doing on your farm with other people, you're going to have to get your neighbors on board too. Similar to if you want to develop software, you want to develop an app, you're going to need growers on board, agronomists as well, and ag retailers or co-ops as well. You will need the whole chain of people involved. If you're going to do that, you will need to speak to people early and make it a collaborative process. And I think that's very important, because a little bit of standalone software which acts as a silo might never get anywhere. Whereas if the technology is great and it's actually integrated with other software, or it's set up in a way that is useful to growers, to agronomists, and to everyone else involved, it's set up for success. And I think that's the main thing we have to look at, and that's the main advice, well, I guess I would like to give to anyone involved, is early on in the process, all the stakeholders have to become involved. If you don't do this, you might just have a great product and it might never go anywhere. I think it's very important.
I guess you apply the same question then to perhaps to software startups who are now entering this field as well. It's important for them also to work with all the stakeholders involved.
That is correct, Charles, because we quite often see great technology out there, but great technology as such doesn't do anything for a grower. What a grower needs is information he can act upon. So he needs actionable advice that he can use to improve his bottom line. Because if a grower is going to pay for software or whatever he's going to pay for, he is wanting to get a return on investment. So for a software startup that has a great idea to help growers improve a part of their operation, if they get in touch with growers and everyone else involved in the process early, they go through the steps necessary and they look together with growers at how this technology they are developing can aid a grower into his decision-making process, they're setting themselves up for a successful launch. If they don't do this, and it's going to be just a launch of a product that no one's heard of and that a grower has never been involved with, you've got a good chance that it doesn't actually satisfy the demands of the end user. And as such, you might have wasted a lot of money. If you collaborate early in the process, you're going to have a lot higher rate of success.
So now we've discussed each of the key technologies that we see playing a key role. I want to bring this to a conclusion. And just as a reminder to everyone, whilst Reinder is providing a few concluding remarks, if you want to ask a question, we've got a dedicated Q&A session after this. So please feel free to ask your questions again, either via the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen or via Twitter using the hashtag #AgricultureBSF. So, and bring this to a conclusion, Reiner.
Well, Charles, as a conclusion, I think my personal opinion is that I think we're in a very exciting space. Growers and other stakeholders in agriculture have traditionally been very willing to adopt new technology. And I think that the technology that we're already seeing used in many other sectors can have tremendous impacts in agriculture. And this is not just a once-off development or a once-off innovation, but I think this is going to be an integrated process, which it has been going for a few years. It's advancing very rapidly now, but it'll be going for the next 5 to 10 years. However, when it comes to, say, connectivity or to data storage, if we set up the processes properly now, we're setting ourselves up for success. And I think we can already identify certain players or certain bits of software now that are set up so that you know that still in 5 or 10 years' time, they're also going to be relevant. And I think that's very important now. And I think that with the amount of money that's getting spent on development, that if we can use that to our advantage, I think everyone can do very well out of this. And I think agriculture in general, we're seeing it starting to play a bigger role every year with increasing population pressure in this earth. Obviously, we're not getting any more land available. So if we can use digital innovations to our advantage to utilize our space and water and other limited resources better, I think it's very exciting. And I think the potential advantages of digital agriculture are probably limitless.
Absolutely. It's a very exciting area. With this, as mentioned, we now have some time for Q&A from the audience. I saw actually whilst you were summing up with the presentation, actually one question came in, which was, do you have any recommended sources to learn about precision agriculture or to keep up with the latest developments?
Well, I guess, Charles, there's lots of sources on the internet. There's certain websites you can look at. Certain magazines can provide information. I guess as a grower, you always have a trusted advisor that helps you grow your crops. Now, this trusted advisor, and this either can be an agronomist or it can be your ag retailer or anyone else that you work with, there's always certain people that are very involved in the sphere of digital agriculture. And I think I'd like to encourage, from a grower perspective, to get in touch with your trusted advisor and say, hey, you're already advising me on either my crop inputs or my financial needs or whatever else you're already advising me on. How are we collaboratively going to work more in the sphere of digital agriculture? And I guess from a software development perspective, look at what the growers are doing. So there's grower meetings or all sorts of other groups of growers that get together and form opinions about what they can improve. When you have grower meetings, if software startups show interest, in my opinion, from what I've seen in my experience, they're always welcome because growers love to, see companies show interest in what they do and show the potential of helping them with new technological advancements. So I guess similar to what we said before with, from a collaborative perspective, talk to each other. Software companies love growers reaching out to them, and growers love software companies reaching out to them. There's very easy venues for that, and there's so many grower groups or other organizations that anyone can get in touch with. The more people talk to each other, I believe the better solutions we'll create altogether.
Super, thank you. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, again, feel free to contact us via the chat box or via Twitter. I think we've got one more question, Reiner. That is, how do you see the industry of digital agriculture in 10 years' time?
Well, I guess, Charles, I think the industry itself will look very much like it does now. And what I mean by that is that there are still a lot of growers that are keen to adopt more digital technology, and there will still be many companies that like to offer more digital services. Obviously, in 10 years' time, I hope, and I'm assuming that we'll be a lot further down the line and there'll be a lot more new technologies available, but there will also be a lot more scope for new technology again, because I see this as an integrated process that's not going to stop. It doesn't have a set starting date. It won't have a set finishing date either. It's going to keep going. And I see those companies that are having their processes sorted now, so that go to the proper processes, due diligence and whatever now, and set up the software in a way that they can advance with over the next 5 to 10 years. I think they will be the front runners in 5 to 10 years. Those companies that maybe have a great idea, but with developing it, don't go through the proper channels, however great the technology is, it'll have a finite lifespan. Whereas if the process is done well, it has an infinite lifespan, and new technological advancements can be added to it over time.
Excellent, thank you. We have another further question, which is about the user experience and how important it is for the user experience when developing software for example, for a farmer or for a grower. How best do you ensure that people find it easy to use this software? I think often one of the challenges is that people, many of the farmers are not the most technically orientated individuals, and perhaps they're not as familiar with some of these newer technologies. Are there certain tips that you can provide to how you can, how best create the software that you ensure it's going to get used?
Well, I think again, this is something, if you have a certain idea of a user interface, get growers to try it. Because indeed, like as you said, there is always growers and growers that don't, I guess they're not as technologically savvy, and especially because normally farmers work more than 40 hours a week, probably closer to 100 in a lot of cases. They don't like things getting added to their tasks, so they don't want to get more work out of adopting a new technology. They expect a new technology to save them time more than anything. So when you develop a new technology, from what I've seen, if you go to a handful of growers, say, listen, would you like to try this? Because I need to know if it's going to work for you or not. And you're very, very directly and very immediately going to get feedback, which is very useful. If you develop, again, a great technology, but it's going to cost a grower an extra hour a day, a lot of growers are not going to have that time, or they don't want to spend that time, and they're simply not going to do it. The same as if you're going to make it too difficult or too cumbersome to handle, it's not going to happen either. Whereas I think, for example, if you look at crop scouting, if you can actually geographically reference your findings of your crop scouting, well, in years to come, that's going to be very valuable information. So where does a pest start, or where do certain weeds, where do they start, is it a certain part of the field, or what stage are they in? All this information is very valuable. Right now, to enter that information manually on a tablet, there's a lot of labor involved. If we can start using voice to text here, which is already happening in certain locations, or certain companies are developing this technology, I should say. If we have that to a point where you just have an agronomist checking the field, speaking into a microphone, the data is getting recorded, and later on it's getting tied, it's getting translated into data and tied to a specific geographical location, all of a sudden you made it easy. If you make an agronomist sit in his car for an hour, enter the data manually, good chance it will not happen, especially in a busy season. So these are all things we have to consider, and especially the new technology that's available, we have to use it to aid us with doing these things.
Okay, excellent. We have another question coming in, which is thinking of smallholder mixed agricultural situations like the Peruvian Altiplano near Lake Titicaca. where the person used to work. Do you see ways for companies like yours, or for in general digital agriculture, to be helpful? And if so, how best to start?
Well, I guess it really depends on if you get mixed agriculture, what sort of products you produce and how you bring them to market. If I look at a mixed farm, a couple of ideas I could think of. For example, if you have beef cows, for example, beef cattle. Now, if you have beef cattle, there's a couple of different things you can do with them. You can just sell them on a market. You can bring it to an abattoir. You can sell them to another grower. However, if you want to work on a paddock to plate concept, and you can use blockchain to actually offer consumers a similar experience to what, for example, the Chinese consumers are wanting from Alibaba. So say if you produce your beef in the Altiplano, but you sell it in Peru, or sorry, in Lima, in a store to consumers that are willing to pay a premium for beef, where they can track the origins and they know how it's been produced, and they know it's been produced with a conscience and set to certain standards. If they can use blockchain technology to track exactly where their products come from, that's going to have a premium. Similar to quinoa. Quinoa is always been produced in this area. It's getting very popular now as well in Europe and North America and other markets. If you have, say, a specific variety, or you produce it in a specific way, which is appealing to consumers, if you then find a way to, say, market it online or sell it in a store in Lima that again use blockchain technology to track it, or maybe you use IoT sensors to improve your flow of information, and by that actually improve the quality of the product you can produce. And the beauty of IoT is that it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. A couple of sensors that send data up to a cloud that a software company then gathers for you and provides ready to use information on your smartphone. It's not like you have to have a big complex system. Similar to using blockchain to tracking where beef comes from for consumers. It's not hard, it's not difficult, and it can be done on a very small scale. And if you can then, instead of producing generic beef, you can create a brand which growers or which consumers can be attracted to, and they can be involved in, and they then choose your brand over generic beef, you've just added value to your product. I think there's a big opportunity there, amongst other opportunities, for small-scale mixed-holder farms.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And I see at this time we don't have any further questions, so I think it's a good point to bring this to a close. And firstly, I would like to say thank you to everyone who joined us today for sharing with us your questions and for joining us today. Thank you to Reinder for sharing your insights. It's been fascinating to hear about the advances in digital agriculture. I should mention to everyone, a recording will be available within 24 hours on our website and also on our YouTube channel. We will be publishing a white paper on digital agriculture also in the next 24 hours. So please also go to our website, download it, take a read of it. If you have any follow-up questions, then please feel free to reach out to us. We're really passionate about digital technology and the impact that digital can have. So we will be delighted to continue the conversation. Reiner, do you have any concluding thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, Charles, I think it's, like I said, I think it's just a very exciting time. And I think especially in a country like Peru, where there's lots of opportunities to, you've got producers and you've got a large consumer center as well. You do have your proximity to other large consumer centers. I think there's a plethora of opportunities here. And I think that if, those people or organizations with good ideas, if they go to the proper channels and use the correct and proper partners to develop this software, they can, be set up for success in future. And I'd really like to see some leading software and other solutions or innovations come from South America and lead the world, because there's no reason why it can't. It doesn't have to be a follower here. South America can be a leader in that, and I think it's got all the ingredients to do that.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And you can see here, just to bring to a close, you can see here our contact details. So as mentioned, please don't hesitate to get in contact with either of us. With that, thank you once again to everyone, and have a good rest of the day.
Bye.